The chandeliers of the Metropolitan Grand glowed like frozen fire, raining crystals of light over the most powerful men and women in New York. It was the annual Real Estate Titans Gala, a night when fortunes were flaunted, alliances forged, and reputations shattered with nothing more than a whispered rumor. Cameras flashed in relentless bursts as tuxedos and couture gowns shimmered under the spotlight. In the center of this storm stood Damian Westwood, the billionaire mogul who had built half the skyline. With his tall frame, sleek tuxedo, and a smile sharpened into a weapon, he looked every bit the king of the night. But it wasn't his business empire that caught the eyes of every guest. It was the woman clinging to his arm. Roxanne Croft. She was younger, daring, radiant in a crimson gown that clung to her every curve. Her laughter spilled like champagne, loud and reckless, a deliberate contrast to the quiet elegance expected of the wives who usually graced these halls. People whispered, some in admiration, others in disdain, but no one dared say the truth aloud. This was Damian's mistress, flaunted openly as though his real wife did not exist. But his real wife did exist. Elena Carter Westwood stood across the room, her sapphire gown a modest armor stretched over the curve of her 6-month pregnancy. One hand rested instinctively on her belly, the other clutching her small clutch so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had dressed carefully, chosen grace over spectacle, believing that tonight was her chance to prove she still mattered in Damian's world. She had thought that maybe, just maybe, standing beside him with their unborn child would remind him of the vows they once shared. She was wrong. As the orchestra swelled with a triumphant symphony, a ripple of gasps surged through the ballroom. It happened so fast that guests later argued over the details, but the truth was cruelly simple. Roxanne, laughing too hard, leaned back near the edge of the stage where champagne glasses glittered like stars. Her heel caught. She stumbled. A collective breath sucked the air from the room. And Damian moved. Like lightning, like instinct, he lunged, not toward his wife, not toward the woman carrying his child, but toward Roxanne. His strong arms wrapped around her, saving her from crashing onto the marble floor. She clung to him dramatically, pressing her face into his chest as cameras captured every angle of his chivalrous rescue. But in his rush, Damian's arm struck Elena. She staggered backward, her balance already fragile under the weight of her swollen belly. The crowd gasped again, louder this time, as Elena's heel slipped on the slick marble. Her body turned, and before anyone could reach her, she fell against a towering glass sculpture meant to honor the city's skyline. The sound of shattering glass split the music like a gunshot. Shards exploded around her, cascading in a glittering storm as Elena's body crumpled to the floor. Blood bloomed scarlet across her pale skin, mingling with the glass that bit into her arms. For one horrible second, silence. Then chaos. Guests screamed. Phones rose into the air, recording, snapping, capturing the image of a pregnant woman sprawled in broken glass while her husband stood a few feet away, clutching another woman to his chest. Roxanne smiled faintly, her face half hidden, as though savoring the performance. Damian glanced down at Elena, his expression unreadable. But he didn't move. Not immediately. Not fast enough. Elena tried to push herself up, her hand slipping on the slick glass. Pain seared her body, but deeper than pain was the humiliation, the searing knowledge that every eye in the room was on her, not with sympathy, but with pity, with judgment. She saw the flashes, the lenses capturing her shame forever. She tasted iron in her mouth, felt the burn of tears threatening to fall, but she bit them back. She wanted Damian to come, to take one step toward her, to prove, even now, that she still mattered. He didn't. Instead, he adjusted Roxanne in his arms, brushing a strand of her hair tenderly away from her cheek, whispering something that made her laugh again. The orchestra faltered, the violinist missing a note as the audience gawked. Whispers slithered through the air. That's his wife. She's pregnant, my God. And he didn't even help her? Elena's body trembled as security finally rushed to her side. A waiter knelt, offering a napkin far too small for the blood. She looked up, her vision swimming, and locked eyes with Damian. For a fleeting second, something flickered there, not concern. And then he turned away, guiding Roxanne off the stage as though nothing had happened. The humiliation cut deeper than the glass. Every headline tomorrow would scream the truth she already knew. She was no longer Damien Westwood's queen. She was a discarded relic, a pregnant wife sacrificed for a mistress. And as the cameras captured her broken body, Elena felt something inside her snap. Not her bones, not her resolve, but the illusion that she was powerless. The pain was unbearable, but through it burned a new fire, something raw and dangerous. She would not stay broken. She would not be forgotten. This night, this fall, this blood on the ballroom floor would not be her ending. It would be the beginning, because Elena Carter Westwood would rise from these shards of glass, and when she did, she would bring Damien's empire crashing down with her. Elena Carter Westwood had not always been a woman dressed in silk gowns and photographed under the harsh flash of society's cameras. Before her name was bound to Damien Westwood's, she had been simply Elena Carter, a girl from a modest neighborhood in Philadelphia. Her father was a high school teacher, her mother a nurse who often worked double shifts. Their home was small but warm, filled with the sound of late-night laughter, Sunday pancakes, and the creak of worn floorboards that carried the weight of ordinary dreams. Elena grew up believing in hard work, in honesty, in the quiet kind of love that lasted because people chose it every day. She was brilliant, too. From the time she was 8 years old, she would sketch buildings on the backs of grocery receipts, fascinated by the lines and angles of the city skyline. By the time she turned 16, her drawings had grown into full designs, bridges, museums, apartments, all imagined with a precision that shocked even her teachers. Architecture wasn't just a career for Elena. It was her way of shaping the world into something more beautiful, something stronger. She earned a scholarship to Columbia University, where she stood out not just for her talent, but for her humility. While her classmates competed for internships at elite firms, Elena spent weekends volunteering at shelters, sketching designs for affordable housing projects. She didn't want to build towers that touched the clouds just for the wealthy. She wanted to create spaces where families like her own could thrive. And then came Damien. She first met him at a charity exhibition where her student project, an eco-friendly housing model, was being displayed. Damien Westwood, already a rising star in real estate, swept into the room like a storm. His presence was magnetic, his charisma undeniable. He was surrounded by investors and journalists, but his gaze fell on Elena as if she were the only person there. "You designed this?" he asked, his voice carrying the kind of confidence that never questioned whether it would be heard. "Yes," she replied softly, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. He smiled in a way that felt dangerous even then. "You have vision, and vision deserves to be seen." That night, Damien insisted on walking her home, his stories larger than life. He spoke of skyscrapers he would build, empires he would rule, and the legacy he intended to leave behind. Elena, young and idealistic, was captivated. He made her feel as though she wasn't just a student from a modest background. She was a queen in waiting. Their romance was a whirlwind. Within months, dinners turned into weekend getaways, and weekend getaways turned into an engagement. Damien showered her with gifts she was too shy to accept at first. Diamond earrings, designer gowns, a vintage watch he claimed reminded him of her timelessness. When he proposed under the glittering lights of the Eiffel Tower, Elena said yes, her heart pounding with the certainty that she had found forever. Marriage, however, was not the fairy tale she had envisioned. At first, Damien was attentive, affectionate even. But as his empire grew, so did his hunger. He became consumed by power, by appearances, by the relentless climb up the social ladder. Elena, once his confidant, became his accessory. She was expected to smile at galas, to host perfect dinners, to bear children who would inherit the Westwood legacy. And so she gave. She gave up late nights at the drafting table. She gave up her dream of opening her own firm. She gave up her name, her identity, her independence, all for a man who promised she was the center of his world. When she learned she was pregnant, Elena thought things might change. She imagined Damien softening, returning to the man who once walked her home and told her she had vision. For a brief moment, she believed she had found a piece of that old love when Damien kissed her forehead and whispered, "We're going to build a family, Elena." But the sweetness didn't last. Pregnancy made her slower, weaker in Damien's eyes. He criticized her for gaining too much weight, for being too tired to attend every event, for choosing flats instead of heels when her ankles swelled. He reminded her constantly of the money he spent, the image he maintained, and the sacrifices he made. And though Elena's heart broke each time, she told herself it was just stress, just pressure. If she was patient, if she endured, love would return. Yet love didn't return. Instead, there was Roxanne. Elena had noticed the changes first in whispers. The late nights, the lingering perfume on Damien's suits, the sudden urgency of business trips that didn't match his calendar. When she asked, he dismissed her, accusing her of being paranoid, emotional, too hormonal to think clearly. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe the man she married still existed beneath the cold exterior. But deep down, she knew. And still, she chose silence. Not for herself, but for the baby. She told herself that once their child was born, Damien would remember what truly mattered. She held on to hope like a lifeline, even as it cut into her hands. That hope shattered the night of the gala. The moment Damien chose to save Roxanne instead of her, every illusion Elena had clung to disintegrated. The humiliation was unbearable, but it also carved something new inside her. Pain gave way to anger, and anger gave way to resolve. In the sterile quiet of the hospital where she was treated for her wounds, Elena stared at the ceiling, one hand resting over the steady rhythm of her baby's heartbeat. For years, she had given up everything for Damien, believing her sacrifice meant something. Now she understood the truth. Damien had taken her love, her dreams, her loyalty, and he had thrown them away. But what he didn't realize was that Elena Carter Westwood was not just a wife. She was not just a pregnant woman sprawled in broken glass. She was a fighter, a visionary, a woman who had rebuilt herself once before and could do it again. And this time she would not rebuild for him. She would rebuild to destroy him. Because somewhere in the shadows, an ally was waiting. Someone powerful enough to give her the weapon she needed to strike back. And when that ally revealed himself, Damien would learn that the woman he discarded was the very woman who could end him. The Metropolitan Grand Hotel was not just a venue. It was a monument to excess, a temple of glass and gold, where the city's elite gathered to worship the gods of wealth and power. Tonight, its grand ballroom pulsed with music, laughter, and the subtle tension of deals whispered over champagne flutes. Crystal chandeliers descended like frozen waterfalls, casting prisms of light onto marble floors, polished until they gleamed like mirrors. The air was thick with the mingling perfumes of designer fragrances, so heavy it clung to the lungs. Waiters in white gloves moved like chess pieces, balancing trays of caviar and vintage champagne as though the very future of society depended on their precision. Everywhere Elena looked, there were masks. Not literal ones, but the kind worn by men and women who had mastered the art of pretending. Smiles were too bright, laughter too rehearsed, compliments laced with venom beneath their polished delivery. This was the jungle of the elite, where reputations could be shattered by a glance and alliances sealed by a single clink of crystal. Damien thrived in this world. He didn't just belong here, he ruled it. Every step he took drew attention. Every word he spoke seemed to ripple outward like a decree. Elena remembered when she had admired that about him, when she had believed his confidence was strength. Now she saw it for what it truly was. Hunger. A hunger that could never be satisfied. Across the room, Roxanne leaned into Damien's side, her crimson dress blazing like a warning signal. She belonged here in a different way. Flashy, bold, the kind of beauty that demanded notice. Men watched her with admiration, women with disdain. But she drank it all in, basking in the attention as though it were her birthright. The irony, Elena thought bitterly, was that she had once believed her own place at Damien's side was secure. She had imagined herself as his partner, his equal, the woman who would help him shape the empire he dreamed of. Yet here she was, reduced to a shadow on the edge of the ballroom, clutching her swollen belly while her husband paraded another woman like a trophy. The orchestra shifted into a sweeping waltz, and couples glided across the dance floor, their movements practiced and elegant. Elena's heart clenched as she watched Damien lead Roxanne into the center, spinning her with a flourish as if the two of them had rehearsed this performance 1,000 times. The crowd erupted in polite applause, murmurs buzzing like bees through the air. "Magnificent," someone whispered behind Elena. "The Westwoods always steal the show." The words burned. The Westwoods. As though she were no longer part of that name, as though Damien and Roxanne had replaced her already. She felt invisible, erased. Yet at the same time, she knew eyes were on her too. Pitying eyes, judgmental eyes, hungry eyes waiting for her to break so they could feast on the spectacle of her downfall. Her hand drifted to her belly. The baby kicked softly, as if reminding her that she was not just a discarded wife. She was a mother, carrying a future Damien had chosen to forget. A wave of nausea washed over her. She moved toward the balcony, desperate for air. The heavy doors opened onto a terrace lined with marble columns, the city glittering beyond like 1,000 watchful eyes. She gripped the railing, breathing deeply, fighting back tears that threatened to spill. But even here, whispers followed her. A pair of women in sequined gowns passed by, their voices hushed but not hushed enough. She looks exhausted. Pregnant and abandoned. It's pathetic, really. I heard Damien is planning to divorce her. Roxanne is the future. Their laughter was cruel, slicing through Elena's heart. She turned away, hiding her face in the shadows. For the first time that evening, she wondered if she should have stayed home, if enduring this humiliation was worth it. Then, a voice interrupted her despair. "Elena?" She turned, startled. Standing a few feet away was Ethan Blackwell, the enigmatic CEO whose reputation rivaled Damien's. Unlike Damien, Ethan avoided the spotlight, preferring quiet power over public spectacle. Tonight, however, he was here, tall and imposing in his tailored black tuxedo, his eyes sharp but not unkind. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said softly. Elena tried to summon a polite smile, the kind she had mastered after years in Damien's world. "It's my duty, I suppose." Ethan studied her for a moment, his gaze lingering on the faint cut along her arm where glass had pierced her earlier. "You shouldn't have to endure this," he murmured, almost to himself. Before Elena could reply, the crowd inside erupted in gasps. She spun back toward the ballroom just in time to see Roxanne stumble on the edge of the stage, Damien rushing to catch her. The moment replayed in slow motion, every eye in the room fixated on the tableau of the billionaire saving his mistress. And then came Elena's fall, the shattering glass, the humiliation that would define her life. Ethan's jaw tightened as he watched the scene unfold. He took a step forward, as though to move toward Elena, but the swarm of cameras and gasps held him back. Instead, he stood frozen, his hands clenched at his sides, his expression unreadable. The world inside the ballroom had erupted into chaos, but outside, on the balcony, Elena's mind was already shifting. Beneath the pain and humiliation, something sharp began to form, a seed of determination, a whisper of revenge. And though no one knew it yet, the man standing in the shadows, Ethan Blackwell, would soon become the unexpected ally who would change everything. Damien Westwood had always been a man who understood spectacle. To him, appearances were not just important, they were currency. Power in his world was not built on truth, but on perception, on how effectively he could command a room, silence rivals with a glance, and make people believe he was untouchable. And tonight, in the glittering ballroom of the Metropolitan Grand, he orchestrated his cruelest spectacle yet. With Roxanne Croft clinging to his arm like a prize he had won, Damien radiated triumph. He had saved her, pulled her into his embrace as the crowd gasped, and now he paraded her across the marble floor like a trophy no one else could claim. Cameras flashed in rapid bursts, capturing his smug smile, her grateful gaze, and the undeniable chemistry between them. To the untrained eye, it looked like romance. To those who knew the truth, it was betrayal flaunted in the harshest light. Elena, still trembling from her fall, could only watch from where she sat on a velvet chair near the edge of the ballroom, her body aching, her heart in pieces. Yet Damien didn't glance her way, not even once. Instead, he leaned down to whisper something into Roxanne's ear, and she threw her head back in laughter, loud enough for everyone to hear. The cruelty wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. Damien wanted the world to see that his loyalty, his affection, his future no longer belonged to the pregnant wife who bore his name. It belonged to Roxanne. Guests whispered behind gloved hands. Some looked horrified, others intrigued, but Damien fed on the attention, his arrogance growing with each stare. He thrived in scandal because scandal kept him relevant. He believed no matter how many rules he broke, his power and wealth would shield him from consequence. "Roxanne?" He said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "You're the only reason I survived tonight." Roxanne beamed, her crimson lips curving into a satisfied smirk. "You saved me, Damien. You always do." The words were like daggers to Elena's chest. She had spent years saving him, saving his image, his reputation, his sanity when business collapsed under the weight of risky deals. She had held him at night when stress threatened to break him, whispered encouragement when rivals circled like wolves. Yet in front of this room, he handed her role to another woman without hesitation. As the orchestra resumed, Damien guided Roxanne into a slow dance. The lights dimmed, and for a moment it seemed the world revolved around them. He bent low, his lips brushing her ear, his hand dangerously close to the curve of her hip. She leaned into him, her eyes flicking toward Elena with a look of victory that needed no words. Elena's stomach twisted, nausea rising not just from her pregnancy, but from the public humiliation pressing down on her. She clutched her clutch tighter, nails biting into the leather, forcing herself to stay upright even as tears threatened to blur her vision. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Not here. Not tonight. Across the room, Damien's business associates watched with thinly veiled unease. They were men who thrived on appearances as much as Damien did, and even they understood the risk of such a brazen display. But Damien didn't care. He had convinced himself he was invincible. "Doesn't he realize the damage this could do?" one investor muttered. Another shrugged. "He doesn't think anyone can touch him." And maybe they were right. Damien had always been ruthless in business, crushing competitors, buying silence, erasing scandals before they grew teeth. To him, Elena's pain was not a liability, it was collateral. He believed she had no power to fight back, but in that belief lay his greatest mistake. For Elena was not the fragile woman he imagined. Not anymore. From her seat, Helena's gaze hardened. The humiliation burned, yes, but beneath it something else stirred. Rage. A cold, steady rage that numbed her pain and steadied her breath. She watched Damien twirl Roxanne, watched his arrogant grin, and silently vowed this would not be the final chapter of her story. Damien might think he had broken her. He might believe she was powerless, too weak to fight. But Elena had once built dreams from nothing, carved a path from a modest home to the heart of Manhattan's elite. She would build again. Not for Damien this time, but against him. And when she did, she would make sure the empire he valued more than anything crumbled into dust. As the dance ended, Damien led Roxanne toward the head table, deliberately passing by Elena's chair. For a brief second, their eyes met. Elena's heart hammered. Would he acknowledge her? Offer even a shred of remorse? No, Damien smirked, a cruel twist of his lips, and leaned down to Roxanne. "Some women can't keep up," he murmured just loud enough for Elena to hear. "That's why they get left behind." Roxanne laughed, and Damien straightened, continuing toward the table without another glance. Elena's nails dug into her palm. The sting of glass in her skin had been sharp, but this wound cut deeper. His words confirmed what she already knew. In his mind, she was disposable. But in that moment, she made a silent promise to herself and to the child growing inside her. She would not be left behind. Damien thought he had won tonight. He thought the spectacle had secured Roxanne's place and erased Elena's. But he was wrong. Because while Damien Westwood flaunted his mistress and basked in his false victory, forces were already moving in the shadows, forces that would soon align with Elena and expose every secret he fought to bury. The sound of shattering glass didn't just echo in the ballroom. It ripped through the carefully constructed illusions of Elena Carter Westwood's life. For a second, the orchestra froze mid-note, the violin's bowstrings trembling in silence. Guests gasped, hands covering jeweled mouths, their eyes wide with the thrill of scandal. Elena lay sprawled across the floor, glass shards glittering around her like jagged stars. Blood welled along her arm, dripping down her pale skin, staining her sapphire gown. The pain was sharp, but the humiliation cut deeper. In her mind, she could already hear the headlines being written. Billionaire's pregnant wife falls in public scene. Westwood wife overshadowed by Mistress. And through it all, Damien stood only a few feet away, holding Roxanne Croft protectively in his arms. Not once did he move toward Elena. Not once did he kneel beside her or call her name. Instead, his focus remained fixed on Roxanne. brushing a strand of hair from her face with the tenderness Elena had once thought belonged to her. The whispers spread like wildfire through the ballroom. "Did you see? He caught the mistress, not the wife. She's bleeding, and he doesn't even care. My God, she's pregnant." Phones were out now, lenses flashing, recording every second. Some tried to shield Elena from the cameras, but most leaned in, eager to capture the image that would dominate social media by morning. Elena struggled to sit up, her palms slipping against the slick floor. Security guards finally rushed forward, lifting her gently, guiding her to a chair at the edge of the room. A waiter offered a napkin, his hand trembling as though afraid of being caught in the drama. But even seated, even with blood dripping from her arm and pain searing through her body, Elena's eyes were locked on Damien. She searched his face for any sign of regret, of concern. She wanted him to come to her, to prove that somewhere inside the ruthless businessman was still the man she had once loved. Instead, Damien leaned closer to Roxanne and whispered something that made her laugh again. It was then that Elena understood. He wasn't just indifferent. He was choosing to humiliate her. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate erasure. And the cameras caught every second. By the time Elena was escorted to a waiting room, her humiliation had already gone viral. Within minutes, Twitter lit up with hashtags: Glassfall, Westwood Drama, Mistress Saved Wife Forgotten. Clips of Damien saving Roxanne while Elena fell replayed endlessly, each replay twisting the knife deeper. One clip, slowed down and set to dramatic music, spread fastest. Elena's wide eyes as she fell, Damien's strong arms around Roxanne, the cruel juxtaposition of rescue and abandonment. Millions of strangers dissected her pain as entertainment. The online commentary was merciless. She should have stayed home. Pregnant women don't belong at galas. Roxanne is stunning. Damien made the right choice. Imagine your husband saving another woman while you bleed. Couldn't be me. Elena's name trended, but not as a respected architect or devoted wife. She became a meme, reduced to a punchline in a scandal she never asked for. At the hospital later that night, Elena sat alone in a sterile white room, her arm bandaged, her gown replaced with a thin cotton robe. The baby was safe, the doctors reassured her, though the stress had taken its toll. But relief did little to soothe the storm inside her chest. She scrolled through the endless stream of videos and comments, her heart pounding with every cruel word. For years, she had supported Damien, sacrificed her career, her identity, her dreams. And this was her reward: public humiliation, broadcast to the world, while her husband held another woman in his arms. Tears blurred her vision, hot and relentless. She pressed a hand to her belly, whispering softly, "I'm so sorry, little one. I thought your father would love us. I was wrong." But even in that moment of despair, something hardened inside her. If Damien thought this night would break her, he was mistaken. This night would become the turning point. Across the city, Damien and Roxanne were still basking in the aftermath of the gala, celebrating at a private after-party filled with sycophants too eager to please. Laughter, champagne, the clink of glasses, all while Elena's humiliation fueled gossip columns and tabloid headlines. Yet even as Damien grinned, reveling in the attention, cracks had begun to form in his empire. Investors whispered doubts, journalists dug deeper, rivals circled. The scandal that boosted his ego also painted him as reckless, heartless, a dangerous liability in the world of billion-dollar deals. And somewhere in the shadows, Ethan Blackwell watched closely. He had seen Elena's fall, seen Damien's betrayal, and though he had remained silent, he hadn't forgotten. Unlike Damien, Ethan understood power was not just about spectacle. It was about timing. And he knew Elena's time was coming. Back in the hospital, Elena wiped her tears, straightened her shoulders, and whispered to herself words she hadn't spoken in years. "I am not weak." She thought of the girl she once was, the architect with dreams, the woman with vision. That girl wasn't gone. She had been buried under years of sacrifice, of compromise, of silence. But tonight had shattered the illusion. And from those shards, she would rise again. Damien had given her a gift he didn't realize: freedom. The freedom to stop pretending. The freedom to stop clinging to love that no longer existed. The freedom to fight back. The humiliation would not be the end of her story. It would be the weapon she used to rewrite it. As dawn broke over Manhattan, Elena stared out the hospital window, her reflection faint against the rising sun. Her body was bruised, her heart scarred, but her resolve was stronger than ever. And when the world least expected it, Elena Carter Westwood would strike back, and Damien would regret the night he chose to let her fall. The days after the gala blurred into one another, heavy and suffocating, as though Elena had fallen not only into glass but into a pit of endless shadows. Her body healed faster than her spirit. The bruises faded, the bandages came off, but the humiliation lingered, carved into her like a scar no doctor could erase. Every time she turned on her phone, the world reminded her of her fall. The viral clips, the mocking memes, the cruel commentary, her pain replayed on loop for millions to consume. At first, she tried to ignore it. She told herself she didn't care what strangers thought, but it was impossible to escape. The supermarket cashier who avoided her eyes, the neighbor who whispered into her phone as Elena passed. Even the nurses at her prenatal checkup exchanged glances when her name was called. She had become infamous, not for her talent, not for her sacrifices, but for being the wife who fell while her husband saved another woman. And Damien never called. Not once. Not a message, not a visit, not even a cold acknowledgement. It was as if she had ceased to exist in his world the moment glass shattered around her. He continued attending parties with Roxanne, their photos splashed across tabloids, laughing, kissing, glowing under the spotlight. The captions twisted the knife deeper. Damien and Roxanne, New York's new power couple. Elena would lie awake at night, one hand pressed to her belly, tears burning her eyes. The silence of the penthouse, once luxurious, now felt like a prison echoing with ghosts of a love she had lost. She stared at the empty side of the bed, remembering the nights she had curled against Damien's chest, believing his promises. Now that space belonged to another woman. The loneliness was unbearable. She stopped eating for days, surviving on tea and water, her appetite stolen by grief. Her mother called, her voice filled with concern, but Elena brushed her off. "I'm fine, Mom. Just tired." She couldn't bring herself to admit the truth, that she was drowning. Even the baby's kicks, once a source of joy, became a reminder of her entrapment. She whispered apologies into the night, guilt gnawing at her. "I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough. I'm sorry your father doesn't care." One afternoon, after yet another headline mocked her, Elena crumpled to the floor of the nursery. The room was half finished, walls painted a soft cream, a crib still in its box, stuffed animals lined neatly on the dresser. She had poured her heart into preparing a sanctuary for her child. Now it felt like a cruel joke. She curled on the carpet, sobbing into her hands, her swollen belly pressing against her knees. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to keep going." For the first time in her life, Elena felt completely broken. The world outside didn't pause for her grief. The stock market ticked on. Damien's empire grew louder. Roxanne's Instagram followers skyrocketed. And Elena disappeared, fading into the margins of a story she had once believed was her own. The breaking point came late one night. She sat by the window, staring at the glittering skyline. Her reflection stared back, hollow-eyed, hair unkempt, skin pale. She barely recognized herself. A news alert buzzed on her phone. Damien Westwood announces engagement to Roxanne Croft. Engagement. Her breath caught, her chest constricted, and for a moment she thought she might suffocate. He hadn't even divorced her yet, and already he flaunted his plans to marry another. Tears blurred the city lights, turning them into smears of fire. She whispered aloud, "How could you do this to me? To us?" Her voice cracked, the words swallowed by the vast silence of the penthouse. Her hand trembled as she reached for the drawer of the bedside table. Inside, untouched since her college days, was a leather-bound sketchbook. She flipped through the pages, old designs of homes, parks, bridges, visions of a world she once wanted to build. Each drawing was a ghost of the girl she had been, full of hope, unbroken by betrayal. Looking at those pages, something inside her stirred. For weeks she had let herself believe Damien's cruelty defined her. She had let the world laugh while she disappeared. But as she traced the lines of her own work, she remembered who she was before him. She was Elena Carter, the architect, the dreamer, the fighter. And if she could build once, she could build again. The thought didn't erase the pain, but it gave her something else, a flicker of resolve. For the first time since the gala, she felt the faintest spark of strength. But strength would not come easily. The next morning, when she finally left the penthouse to buy groceries, paparazzi swarmed. Flashes blinded her. Voices shouted cruel questions. "Elena, do you regret attending the gala? Are you jealous of Roxanne? Does Damien still support you financially?" She froze, her heart racing, clutching her belly protectively. Strangers watched from the sidewalk, some snapping photos on their phones, others whispering. Her cheeks burned with shame. A woman passing by sneered, "Should have kept her husband happy." That broke her. She stumbled back into the car, tears streaming down her face, shaking with rage and humiliation. That night, alone again, she whispered to her unborn child, "We will survive this. I don't know how yet, but we will." And just as she spoke those words, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Elena, I saw what he did. Meet me tomorrow, things you need to know. E.B. E.B. Ethan Blackwell." Her heart pounded. Damien's most dangerous rival, a man with power, resources, and secrets. She stared at the message, torn between fear and hope. And for the first time, Elena realized that maybe she wasn't as alone or as powerless as Damien wanted her to believe. Elena Carter Westwood could not sleep the night she received the message. The words glowed on her phone screen, simple yet earth-shattering. "Elena, I saw what he did. Meet me tomorrow. There are things you need to know, E.B." She read it a dozen times, her mind racing. Ethan Blackwell. A man as powerful as Damien, maybe more. His empire was vast, his influence whispered about in corridors where deals worth billions were made. But unlike Damien, Ethan was elusive. A phantom in the press. He rarely gave interviews, never flaunted his wealth, never paraded women on his arm. He was the opposite of Damien in every way, and also his most dangerous rival. Why would Ethan reach out to her? What could he possibly want with a woman the world now mocked as broken and discarded? By dawn, exhaustion had overtaken her. But when she awoke, the decision was clear. She had nothing left to lose. That afternoon, she met him at a quiet cafe on the Upper East Side. The place was discreet, far from paparazzi and society gossip. Ethan was already there, seated at a corner table. His presence was commanding, yet understated. He wore a simple navy suit, no flashy watch, no entourage. But his eyes, sharp, calculating, almost unsettling, seemed to see right through her. "Elena," he said softly as she sat down, "I'm sorry for what happened to you." The sincerity in his tone startled her. She had grown so accustomed to empty sympathy, people whispering condolences while secretly reveling in her downfall, that real compassion felt foreign. "You didn't call me here just to say that," she replied cautiously. A faint smile tugged at his lips. "No. I called you because you deserve to know the truth about Damien." Elena's chest tightened. "What truth?" Ethan leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Your husband is not just a philanderer. He's a criminal. He has been laundering money through shell corporations for years. He's stolen millions from investors, manipulated land deals, and paid off officials to bury the evidence." Elena blinked, stunned. She had suspected Damien of many things: selfishness, arrogance, betrayal. But this was something else entirely. "You're saying he's corrupt?" "Worse," Ethan said. "He's reckless. He believes he's untouchable. But I have the evidence that proves otherwise. Emails, bank transfers, offshore accounts, enough to destroy him." Her breath caught. "Then why haven't you gone public?" Ethan's expression darkened. "Because timing is everything. If I expose him too soon, he'll spin the narrative, paint himself as the victim, and bury the story under a mountain of lies. I need someone who can deliver the blow at the right moment. Someone the public already sees as his victim. Someone like you." The weight of his words settled over her like a storm. He was offering her not just justice, but revenge. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "I'm pregnant. I'm already broken." "No," Ethan said firmly, his gaze locking onto hers. "You're not broken. You're wounded, and wounds heal. What you are, Elena, is dangerous to him, because you know his weaknesses, because you represent everything he threw away, and because when you rise, you'll prove to the world that Damien Westwood isn't without the woman he discarded." Her heart pounded. Part of her wanted to run, to retreat back into the safety of silence. But another part, the part that had sketched buildings on grocery receipts, the part that had dreamed of shaping worlds, burned with new fire. "What would I have to do?" she asked finally. Ethan leaned back, his voice calm but deliberate. "You don't need to lift a finger. I'll give you the evidence. When the time is right, you present it, In public, at one of his precious galas perhaps. The same stage he used to humiliate you, you'll use to destroy him. Elena's hands trembled around her teacup. The image was intoxicating. Damien, stripped of power, exposed as a fraud, his empire crumbling in front of the same people who once applauded him. But fear gnawed at her. And if he retaliates, he'll come after me. He always does. Ethan's gaze softened for the first time. He won't touch you, not while I'm here. There it was, the other truth she hadn't expected. Ethan wasn't just offering justice. He was offering protection. Perhaps more. She felt the unspoken weight of his words, the way his eyes lingered on her longer than necessary. She shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. Ethan reached into his briefcase and slid a folder across the table. Inside is enough to bury him. Look at it when you're ready. But remember, Elena, this is your choice, no one else's. Her fingers hovered over the folder, her pulse quickening. This was it. The key to her revenge, her salvation, her freedom. But it was also dangerous. Once she crossed this line, there would be no going back. That night, alone in her penthouse, she opened the folder. Page after page of documents confirmed Ethan's words. Bank records showing transfers to offshore accounts, emails where Damien ordered bribes and cover-ups, photos of him meeting with shadowy figures in private jets and hotel suites. Each piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin of Damien's empire. Tears filled her eyes, not from sorrow, but from rage. She had given everything to this man. Her love, her loyalty, her body, her child, and all along he had not only betrayed her, but built his empire on lies. She pressed a hand to her belly. "I'll make him pay," she whispered. "For both of us." Her resolve hardened. She would not let Damien win. She would not let her child grow up in his shadow. But as she closed the folder, a chill ran down her spine, because buried at the very back was something she hadn't expected. A photograph. Damien and Roxanne. Not just together, but in Damien's office. Roxanne seated at Elena's desk, papers spread before her. Ethan had scrawled a note beneath it. "She knows more than you think. Be careful." Elena's breath hitched. So Roxanne wasn't just a mistress. She was involved in Damien's schemes, perhaps even complicit. The betrayal cut deeper than she imagined, and it meant the battle ahead would be fiercer, more dangerous than she had prepared for. Still, one thing was certain. The woman Damien left bleeding on the ballroom floor would be the same woman who tore his empire apart. And now, she had the weapon to do it. The folder from Ethan Blackwell stayed on Elena's nightstand for days, like a loaded weapon waiting to be fired. Each morning she woke up, her eyes landed on it. Each night she whispered to herself, "Not yet." But with every passing hour, the fire inside her grew hotter. The humiliation of the gala had shattered her illusions. The folder gave her clarity, but what she needed now was strength. Strength to stop being the woman Damien had reduced her to, weak, silent, erased, and to become someone new. The first step was shedding her fear. Elena stood before the mirror one morning, staring at the pale, exhausted woman staring back. Her once glossy hair hung limp. Her skin was sallow, her eyes ringed with shadows. She barely recognized herself. This was what Damien's betrayal had done. Broken her spirit, dulled her shine. But no more. She reached for the scissors in her drawer. With trembling hands, she cut. Long strands fell to the floor, each snip a release of the past. By the time she finished, her reflection was different. Shorter, sharper, freer. A woman who no longer clung to the version of herself Damien had controlled. The next step was reclaiming her identity. She called an old professor from Columbia, a mentor who had once told her she had the talent to change skylines. "I want to return to work," Elena said. "Not just as a wife, not as his shadow, but as me." Within a week, she was sketching again, consulting on small projects. At first, her hand shook as she held the pencil, but with each line, her confidence returned. She wasn't just drawing buildings, she was rebuilding herself. Still, she knew talent alone wasn't enough. To face Damien, she needed armor. That's where Ethan stepped in. One evening, he arrived at her penthouse with a garment bag. "You'll need this soon," he said, handing it to her. Inside was a gown, black silk, tailored to perfection, elegant yet commanding. Not the delicate dresses she had worn to please Damien. This was different. This was power stitched into fabric. "Why are you helping me?" Elena asked, her voice cautious. Ethan met her gaze steadily. "Because Damien thinks he's untouchable." "But no man is untouchable. not when he underestimates the woman standing against him. For the first time in months, Elena smiled, not out of politeness, not to cover her pain, but because she believed him. And so, piece by piece, she transformed. She began attending small networking events, not as Damien's wife, but as Elena Carter, the architect. At first, people whispered, but soon they listened. Her insights on design, her vision for sustainable housing, her calm yet commanding presence. Slowly, the narrative shifted. She was no longer just the wife who had fallen at the gala. She was a woman rising again. The tabloids noticed. Elena Carter Westwood steps out in stunning black ensemble. Discarded wife turns heads at industry event. From victim to visionary, Elena Carter's remarkable return. Each headline felt like a step forward, a piece of her dignity reclaimed. But transformation wasn't just about appearances. It was about mindset. At night, Elena sat with Ethan, studying the folder. He walked her through Damien's crimes, explaining each forged document, each illicit transfer. The more she learned, the stronger she felt. Damien had built his empire on lies, but Elena was learning how to dismantle it. "You're not just fighting for revenge," Ethan reminded her one evening. "You're fighting for your future, for your child's future. Don't forget that." His words anchored her. This wasn't just about humiliating Damien, it was about building a life where her child would grow up proud of their mother. One afternoon, Elena stood in front of her unfinished nursery, staring at the crib still in its box. She picked up a paintbrush and began to work. Each stroke of soft blue across the walls felt symbolic, a promise to her baby that no matter what happened, they would be safe, loved, and raised by a mother who refused to be defeated. When the room was finished, Elena stood back and whispered, "We'll be okay, I promise." Her transformation was nearly complete. The final step came when she accepted Ethan's invitation to a private gala hosted by one of New York's most influential investors. She walked into the room wearing the black silk gown he had given her. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Cameras flashed, not in mockery, but in awe. She wasn't the broken wife anymore. She was radiant, powerful, untouchable. Across the room, Elena caught sight of Damien and Roxanne. They froze, their smug smiles faltering. For the first time, Damien's eyes widened, not with indifference, but with something else: recognition. Fear. Elena held his gaze, her chin high, her posture strong. She didn't flinch, she didn't look away. For once, Damien was the one left unsettled. She mingled with ease, shaking hands, discussing projects, commanding attention with her quiet confidence. Investors who had once dismissed her as the wife now leaned in to hear her ideas. By the end of the night, she had secured meetings, partnerships, opportunities that would have seemed impossible only weeks earlier. Ethan approached her as the evening wound down. "You see now," he said softly, "you don't need Damien's name. You never did." Elena smiled faintly. "But I'll use it, one last time, to end him." Her transformation was complete. She was no longer Damien's victim. She was the storm on his horizon. And soon, she would strike. Because the next gala, the one Damien believed would cement his dominance, was where Elena planned to expose everything. And this time, the world wouldn't see her fall. They'd see him burn. The night of the Global Real Estate Summit arrived, and New York shimmered like a jewel under 1,000 lights. The city buzzed with anticipation. For weeks, the press had whispered about Damien Westwood's upcoming keynote speech, an announcement that, according to leaks, would secure his dominance over the industry for decades to come. He had chosen the Waldorf Grand Ballroom as his stage, a venue dripping with history and luxury. The chandeliers sparkled, the marble floors gleamed, and the air crackled with ambition. Politicians, billionaires, media tycoons, everyone who mattered was there. This wasn't just an event, it was a coronation. And Damien Westwood, dressed in a flawless Tom Ford tuxedo, looked every bit the king he believed himself to be. On his arm, Roxanne Croft glowed in a crimson gown, the same shade she had worn the night Elena fell into glass. Her smile was polished, her hand possessive on Damien's sleeve. Cameras flashed as they entered, reporters shouting questions. "Mr. Westwood, is tonight your biggest announcement yet?" "Roxanne, how does it feel to stand beside the man of the hour?" Damien grinned, basking in the attention. "Tonight," he declared, "we make history." But history was already being written, just not the way he imagined. Because across the room, entering quietly, was Elena Carter Westwood. She wore the black silk gown Ethan had given her, her hair sleek, her posture regal. No cameras had been tipped off to her arrival. But as she walked into the ballroom, conversations stopped. Heads turned, whispers spread like wildfire. That's her, the wife. She looks different. Elena's presence was magnetic, undeniable. She no longer looked broken, she looked untouchable. Damien's eyes found her across the room, and for the first time in years his smile faltered. Roxanne followed his gaze, her lips tightening as jealousy flared. Elena didn't flinch. She met Damien's stare with cool defiance, then turned away, as though he were nothing more than an inconvenience. The evening unfolded with its usual charade, champagne toasts, networking, speeches, but beneath the glittering surface, tension brewed. Elena moved gracefully from group to group, shaking hands with investors, exchanging quiet words with journalists, all while Ethan lingered nearby, a silent sentinel, ensuring she was never alone. And then, at last, the moment arrived. The lights dimmed, and Damien strode to the podium, his confidence radiating. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice booming through the hall. "Tonight, we unveil the future of real estate, Westwood International's expansion into global markets. This is not just growth, it is destiny." Applause thundered. Cameras rolled. Damien soaked it in, spreading his arms like a man blessing his kingdom. And then, from the back of the room, a voice rang out. "Destiny built on lies." The hall fell silent. Every head turned. Elena stepped forward, her heels clicking against marble, her black gown flowing like liquid shadow. She held a folder in her hands, the same folder Ethan had given her. Damien's face drained of color. "Elena," he spat, his voice sharp. "Sit down, you're embarrassing yourself." But Elena didn't stop. She mounted the small staircase, her presence commanding. She turned to the audience, her voice steady, strong. "My name is Elena Carter Westwood. For years I stood by this man. I believed in him. I sacrificed my dreams, my identity, my dignity. And this is how he repaid me, by betraying me, humiliating me, discarding me. But tonight I am not here as his wife. I am here as the woman who will tell you the truth." Gasps rippled through the room. Elena opened the folder and held up the first page. Emails, bank records, proof that Damien Westwood has been laundering money through offshore accounts for years. Murmurs erupted. She turned another page. Bribes to government officials to secure illegal land deals. The crowd shifted uneasily, phones raised, cameras flashing. Another page. Fraudulent contracts, stolen funds, embezzlement. This is the empire Damien Westwood built. Not on vision, not on innovation, but on corruption and lies. Damien slammed his hand against the podium. "Lies, all of it. She's a bitter woman trying to destroy me because I left her. Don't believe a word she says." But Elena was ready. She held up a USB drive. "And here," she said calmly, "is the digital evidence. Verified, time-stamped, undeniable. It's already been sent to the press. Even as we speak, the truth is spreading across every major outlet." The room erupted. Journalists bolted for the exits. Phones buzzed with breaking news alerts. Investors whispered furiously, some already distancing themselves, others glaring at Damien as though he had poisoned them. Elena turned her gaze back to him. "You thought you broke me. You thought I would stay silent. But tonight, Damien, the world sees you for what you are. And it's not a king, it's a fraud." Roxanne's face paled. She looked at Damien, her mask of confidence cracking. For the first time, she realized the man she clung to wasn't invincible. He was finished. Damien's fists clenched, his face red with rage. "You'll regret this, Elena. You'll regret the day you turned against me." But Elena only smiled faintly. "No, Damien. The only thing I regret is wasting so many years believing you deserved me." The audience gasped, applause breaking out, scattered at first, then swelling into thunder. Some stood, clapping, cheering her courage. Others stared in stunned silence, their faith in Damien collapsing before their eyes. Elena stepped down from the stage, her head high, her steps steady. She walked past Damien without looking at him, the sound of applause echoing in her ears. Damien shouted after her, his voice cracking. "This isn't over." But it was. Everyone knew it. Still, as Elena reached the exit, she felt Ethan's steady hand at her back, guiding her through the chaos. And in the corner of her vision, she saw Roxanne slip out a side door, her phone pressed to her ear, her expression cold. Because while Damien's empire crumbled tonight, Elena realized one truth too late. Roxanne wasn't finished. And the war was far from over. The fallout was immediate. By morning, Damian Westwood's name, once synonymous with power, was plastered across every front page in the country. But this time, the headlines weren't about his empire or his glamour. They were about fraud, corruption, betrayal. Damian Westwood exposed. Wife reveals billion-dollar scandal. From king to criminal, the fall of a real estate titan. Pregnant wife becomes hero in public showdown. Every news outlet replayed Elena's speech from the gala. Her words, clear and unwavering, spread across the world. Strangers who had once mocked her now praised her courage. Women sent messages calling her an inspiration. Men confessed she had reminded them of the power of dignity and truth. Elena Carter Westwood was no longer just the woman who fell into glass. She was the woman who shattered an empire. Damian, meanwhile, spiraled. His investors withdrew, one by one, like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Contracts dissolved. Banks froze his accounts. And within days, federal investigators announced an inquiry. The evidence Elena presented was undeniable. The man who had once walked through ballrooms like a king was now hounded by reporters outside courtrooms, his face pale, his arrogance gone. Roxanne Croft, his so-called queen, disappeared from his side almost instantly. The same tabloids that once celebrated their romance now splashed her betrayal across glossy covers. Mistress runs, Billionaire stands alone. For Elena, however, the days after the gala were strangely quiet. She spent them preparing for her baby, painting the last touches of the nursery, folding tiny clothes into drawers. For the first time in months, she felt peace. The storm was still raging around Damian, but for her, the air was finally clearing. And yet, healing wasn't instant. Nights were still hard. Sometimes she woke in a panic, the sound of shattering glass echoing in her dreams. But when that happened, she pressed a hand to her belly, whispering to her child, "We're safe now. He can't hurt us anymore." The world, however, wasn't finished with her. Reporters camped outside her building, begging for interviews. TV producers offered book deals, talk shows promised airtime, but Elena declined them all. She didn't need to shout louder. She had already said what needed to be said. What she wanted now was a life, not as Damian's wife, not as the woman scorned, but as Elena Carter. One afternoon, she received a call from the Dean of Columbia's School of Architecture. "Your story inspired our students," he said warmly. "We'd like to invite you to give a lecture, to remind them that architecture isn't just about buildings. It's about strength, and you embody that strength." Elena accepted. Standing before the class a week later, she told her story, not about Damian, not about scandal, but about resilience, about how vision could rebuild even the most broken foundations. Her students applauded, some with tears in their eyes, and Elena realized something profound. She hadn't just regained her voice. She had found a new purpose. Meanwhile, Damian's downfall deepened. When the trial began, Elena sat quietly in the courtroom, not for revenge, but for closure. She listened as prosecutors laid out his crimes, as witnesses testified, as evidence stacked higher and higher. Damian tried to glare at her from across the room, but his eyes no longer held power. His suits hung looser, his posture slouched. And when the judge read the verdict, guilty on multiple counts, Elena felt no triumph, only release. He was no longer her burden. The man who had once left her bleeding in glass would now live behind bars, stripped of everything he valued. After the sentencing, reporters swarmed her again. "Elena, how does it feel to see him fall?" She answered simply, "Justice was never about watching him fall. It was about making sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. Now I can finally move on." And move on she did. Months later, Elena gave birth to a healthy baby boy. As she held him in her arms, tears streamed down her face, not of sorrow, but of joy. She whispered his name, chosen long ago when hope still flickered, Gabriel, her angel, her reason. The nurses smiled, Ethan waiting quietly in the corner of the room. He had been there throughout her pregnancy's final months, steady, protective, never overstepping. He offered help without demand, guidance without control. When Elena looked at him now, holding her child, she saw not just an ally, but the possibility of something more. She wasn't ready for love, not yet, but for the first time, she believed it could exist again. Weeks later, she took Gabriel for a walk in Central Park. Strangers smiled, some recognizing her, some not. A woman stopped her, tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "You showed me I don't have to stay with someone who doesn't value me. Because of you, I left." I'm free now. Elena's throat tightened. She squeezed the woman's hand, realizing that her story had become more than revenge. It had become hope for countless others. As the sun set over the park, Elena whispered to her son, "This is our new beginning, and we'll live it on our terms." Back at home, she opened her old sketchbook once more. She began to draw. Not skyscrapers this time, but homes. Warm, inviting, filled with love. Spaces not for power, but for people. Her next project would not be about outshining Damien or proving herself to anyone. It would be about building something real. And as she sketched, she smiled. The woman who once fell into glass was gone. In her place stood a mother, a visionary, a survivor. Elena Carter Westwood was no longer broken. She was reborn. And to every woman watching, her message was clear. You are stronger than your pain. You are more than the man who betrays you. And when you rise not just for yourself, but for everyone who needs to see that broken glass can still reflect light. So that's it, my wonderful friends. The story has closed its last chapter. If you're still here with me right now, it means something in Elena's journey touched your heart in a way that words alone can't explain. And maybe, just maybe, it's because deep down we all know what it feels like to be broken and how powerful it is to rise again. The Stoics often said, "What stands in the way becomes the way." Elena's pain, her betrayal, her shattered glass floor, that was the obstacle. But it also became her path to strength, to freedom, to rebirth. And isn't that what life is about? Not escaping hardship, but transforming it into fuel. If this story moved you, please don't just keep it inside. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength, and make sure to subscribe so you never miss another journey like this. Together, we rise from the shards, stronger than before.